Legionaries, ladies and gentlemen, this is General Lance, and this is Sergeant Barnes here interviewing Andreas, and you'll know him as Lingua Machina on Twitter. And welcome, Andreas. Welcome to the transmission to the War Room.
Salve, gracias Tibiago. Thank you very much, Lance. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Salve. So I guess you pronounce it like the classical Romans did, with a W instead of a V. So instead of Venedici, it's Wenewediwiki, right?
Right. Yeah, that's the big discovery over the last decade or so was recovering the lost pronunciation of classical Latin in the Roman period as Julius Caesar would have spoken it. And that there's been a amazing spoken community revival in classical Latin using this pronunciation style. But the Italian-based versions promoted by the Catholic Church is primarily more popular in Europe and Italy, and it sounds a lot more Italian, like you mentioned, and I don't like it, so I don't speak it. It sounds weird to me. You know, when you go to like the United Kingdom and everyone's speaking in their British accent, and after a while you're just like, you know, I don't want to sound like these people at all. That's kind of my opinion of Church Latin.
So that's the esoteric reason behind the American Revolution. It's just that we thought their accent was whack. No, but so I mean, aside from of course being a Latin aficionado and someone adept in classical understanding of the world, I think the other thing that you bring to the table here is obviously the geopolitical aspect, and there are a lot of happenings, and I figure we'll just dive in head first and just talk about the 5,000-pound elephant JDAM in the room. The Israel invasion of Palestine. I mean, what's your first impressions? And I think that we'll just go in from there.
Yeah, great topic. And yeah, very frightening one. And also world-changing one. The consequences of what we've been witnessing over the last month are unparalleled in history. I think this vastly exceeds the risks that we can use to quantify or qualify what kind of risks the world are in based on prior wars, World War II, World War I. This is completely different. We live in a globalized world now. There are Palestinian sympathizers or actual Palestinians all over the Western world, and the risks that we are all under because of this conflict is truly terrifying.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because I think the entire last half of the century has been characterized by this move to globalization, and of course the fall of the Soviet Union would herald a century or the end of history. I hate Francis Fukuyama. If Francis Fukuyama is listening to this, by the way, you ruined my life. I read your book when I was 15. I have a vendetta against you. You have no choice. I'll be following you on Twitter. Anyway, point being is that I think the most interesting thing is that aside from having, and from my military background, we're considering supply chains and so on and so forth in a military setting. I think people mistake the importance of ethnic groups and their diaspora. For instance, recently there was a Nagorno-Karabakh, I don't know how you pronounce it, the Armenian-Azeri war, And there are significant lobbies for both sides in Washington. And it's kind of like the issue with having our type of, it's not even an empire really, it's just this Borg, is that all these impulses, these incentive impulses, they inflame across the world and they have these effects. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I think the most interesting thing that's happened since specifically 91 is the decline of Baathism as a force and the ascendancy of international Islam, as well as, of course, the Pinkoist Western Gramsciite kind of communism that's kind of made an unholy alliance. But in any case, I think the most interesting aspect we're seeing is this huge rift in the left, which is one on the one side is of course the Trotskyite neocons backing Israel, and then the other side, which is the Gramsciite Pinkos backing the Palestinians. I mean, could you comment on that?
Yeah, I can. And there is what we're seeing unfold now has honestly, been planned for a long time by the powers that be, and the sheer number of uh, uh, let's just call them Islamists or Zionists or Christian interest groups in this very small part of the world is really, really passionate and unbridled in what they want. And I think it's probably a best one of the best descriptions of politics as a zero-sum game right now is the war in Gaza, because there's only going to be one winner in this. Right, it's going to be winner take all, and then the other side gets physically removed, and that's really scary. And you talked about there's ethnic components about this, but and you see in the mainstream media how the narrative is formulated that Israel has a right to defend itself, and that's a talking point that they promote, which ignores the fact of what we're witnessing on the ground in Gaza is a religious war. This is a war to the death between interrelated ethnic groups that have hated each other for thousands of years and will likely always hate each other. And for other ethnic groups or nations or whatever to bring themselves into this conflict is opening yourselves up to irrational hatred and risks that is really no one should ever really want to do that. Like no one walks into a religious war willingly thinking, oh yeah, we're going to be the good guys here. We're going to mop them up in 6 days or 6 weeks, and we'll be heroes. Right? That's not what's going to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that I feel like in the American concept, it's like everything is very quick wars, very like decisive wars, especially since World War One and Two. Like we have this misconception that all wars should be decisively ended or won. And obviously, that's not something you can do with the Middle East. I mean, nothing wins in the Middle East. I mean, we've experienced that. We lost strategically in Iraq because it's become functionally a proxy of Iran, which is another adversary of ours, and we lost outright in Afghanistan. And I don't really necessarily understand what people seem to gain from an American perspective in meddling ourselves with this conflict, which has nothing to do with us. We have, in fact, it's just an albatross around our neck that we should just completely cut loose. You know what I mean? I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like it's just such a waste of money and time and blood that I assume that they're trying to get us entangled in.
Yeah, there's I agree with you on those points, and there's unfortunate consequences of our national leadership across the spectrum, um, being messianic, apocalyptic, religious fanatics that want more than anything to rebuild a Jewish temple in Jerusalem
Hmm.
in order to bring about
The second coming.
prophetic statements. Yeah, exactly. Bring about those prophecies that they hold so dear. And what a brilliant play, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
no,
that a
it's
brilliant play?
realpolitik.
Yeah,
You wouldn't understand. Us
yeah.
rubes, we wouldn't
Like
understand.
how does a group of 6, 7 million people, or 8 or 9 around the world, get you know, allies of 300 to 400 to 500 million, like backing them in this project? And it's through religion, it's through even the lens that, as you mentioned, the left wing politics. Like there is this dichotomy of uh, anti-colonial sentiment that is really popular in the left that they're using to want to to justify the elimination of Israelis, which is a pretty gnarly or ugly worldview any way you look at it. And those are this. And if you look at like the right wing approach for this is, we just want to stay out of it, right? Like we want to be the reasonable person in the room, and that is completely what we're not hearing
Yeah.
in Congress, in the media, or anything like that. Anywhere where the Zionists are in ascendancy, there is a one-party line on what's acceptable. You've probably seen videos of evangelists on Twitter
Hmm.
espousing their views on this matter, and it's really terrible. I'm definitely not. I'm not optimistic
Oh,
about
well,
anything.
you should defer to their opinion because apparently the adults are in the room. You know what I mean? But no, I joke a little bit too much. But I say, just for the benefit of the audience here, let me just break it down for the audience where things stand geopolitically. Just today, of course, there are concentrations of Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran, and Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps members apparently concentrating on the southern Lebanese border, which are threatening to either invade or to conflict with the IDF, as well as, of course, Hamas. And here's the issue that I think a lot of people don't understand, is that a lot of the Middle East is already embroiled in this kind of Cold War, and it's between Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Trucial states, which is Qatar, Oman, and so on, and of course, the specter in the room, which is radical Islam. Now, all of these factions hate each other, and a lot of them actually are cozy to Israel, had it not been for what's happening now, which is the disproportionate abuse of violence, which is aimed at ethnically cleansing the area. And somehow this is a massive blunder because what's happening is basically all these Arab states and even Persian states, of course, they're not Arab, and Turkish forces are actually aligning against Israel. And I mean, you see this kind of shortcoming happen previously with Ukraine, which is basically Russia, China, and Iran all hated each other historically. Even through the Cold War, there were border clashes between the PRC and the Soviet Union. But ever since Kissinger left office, and say what you want about Kissinger, but at least he was a shrewd diplomat and understood how the balance of powers lie and how to, play one enemy off the other. Basically, whoever's in the State Department formulating whatever plan managed to galvanize all these mutually hating opponents against us. And I think that's what's happening in a microcosm in the Middle East. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but where's your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, that's a huge topic. I'd like to just focus in on a second on when you were talking about the ethnic cleansing going in Gaza and the indiscriminate use of bombs in residential neighborhoods, the collective punishment of civilians for crimes. These are actions that is has been considered inexcusable or unacceptable for anywhere else on Earth, right? And think of the Texas border controversy a couple years ago with the U.S. Border Patrol member accused of using a whip on a illegal immigrant, which didn't happen, but he was accused of that, right? Compare that with just using blockbuster bombs on entire neighborhoods. Like there is no there is no restraint involved in the use of military force here that is an unacceptable use of military force by standards of international law, which are pseudo laws. But let's just say for the case of argument that murdering civilians is wrong, right?
Right.
Like that's what I was raised in, that values. I accept that values, but that's not what Israel is doing. And Israel, for decades, has been using a continuum of overwhelming force from violent actors in the region. They classify terrorist activities there as a military counterinsurgency strategy versus a law enforcement and prosecutional one, right? So there is when the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, like everything looks like a nail.
Right.
And so there will be no self-restraint. It's a religious war. These are people that have countless reasons to hate each other. Like I'm not going to argue that. I'll condemn violence wherever it happens in the world. But for a peace process to start, or even a ceasefire to start, there's going to have to be a desire to lower the costs of human suffering and death. And there is none of that. It doesn't exist anywhere. Like where was the great anti-war left in the invasion of Iraq? Like where did those people go? Like, where are they?
Well, we know where they are, where they're based out of. Michael
Yeah.
Moore
Well,
from
yeah, yeah. They're in DC now. Yeah, they grew up and they got jobs in DC. They're defense contractors. They're lobbyists themselves. They're getting their own piece of the cut in this conflict, and is pretty disgusting at scale.
I think that's the issue, is that I see in the past, for instance, we've had provocations before. I mean, this isn't the first time in that specific area where we've had even American troops, mass casualty event, for instance, in Lebanon, Beirut in '86, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not the first time. However, it is the first time under the State Department, for instance, applying in such a ham-fisted way, I guess, let's say diplomacy, right? So basically without the kind of I guess keen decisions, responsibility of defusing tensions. I think the people that are in control of, which is very concerning to me as an American, is basically denouncing anyone who disagrees with the policy coming from Washington, left or right, is a terrorist or some kind of other crazy buzzword. And then basically, what we're seeing is people, it's like jingoism without the jingo, if that makes sense. It's like there is only one acceptable course of action here. I mean, have you seen that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what I think a lot of people fail to realize is that Zionism is a form of nationalism. It's a pro-Jewish nationalism. However you think or feel about it, what that means is that they are going to take every action that they believe is going to benefit themselves or their citizens or their people above all other considerations. Everything else comes secondary. You could consider it a total war philosophy, if I can summon Goebbels to the conversation. It would be, it's almost like they learned from late war, Third Reich talking points, the war in Ukraine, talking points. How in Ukraine, Russian citizens are the enemies of the Ukrainian ethnic interests, and so they're targeted for all sorts of terrible things. And the Palestinian sides, who are clearly not the sharpest tool in the sheds, they fall into this pattern of violent psychosis, which is ugly and terrible and all the rest of it. And so that gives the Zionists like all the ammo they need to promote, that image that if you're against us, it's because you're with these guys, and that's the brilliant propaganda campaign that they've developed and honed over decades, and it's pretty terrible.
No, of course, and I think that the most interesting thing is, which is unprecedented even during the Cold War, is the presence of two strike carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yes.
And I'm sure that you're
Yeah.
probably aware of, like, as military, especially ballistic missile technology and censoring is improving, like over the horizon capability and engagement is also improving. I mean, that's probably the biggest issue we're facing with the PRC is not necessarily that they're having this huge manufacturer of blue water navy, but also because of their land-based ballistic missile technology, which is interdicting any kind of close naval assets we might have in the region. I think it's a huge misstep. I mean, of course, I don't know anything. What am I? I'm just an idiot on the internet. However, I would say that, like, placing um, two two of our greatest assets so close to the shore with these, I guess, how do you say, unhinged factions that are capable of actually striking these groups is probably a mistake. I don't know. What's your think on that?
Yeah, and in fact, there's even rumors of more than two. There's a rumor of a third going into the Mediterranean, and I believe there's a fourth one south of India monitoring the situation south of Iran. And so it seems very clear to me that the signal is being sent to the entire Middle East that the United States is going to support Israel no matter what it does. If you try to do anything to stop us or prevent the physical removal of the Gazians, you're going to get clapped by the combined Israeli-United States Air Force, which was a really big deal in the pre-hypersonic missile era, um, which only ended not too long ago. Over the last few years, uh, ballistic missiles of the speed that go Mach 7 to Mach 9 flight time launched I'll give an example, the Kinzhal missiles fielded by Russia that Putin has announced are on permanent patrol in the Black Sea now, monitoring the situation in the Middle East. Those missiles have a top speed of Mach 9. I did some napkin math the other day, like how long would it take for one of those missiles to go from international waters north of Turkey to somewhere southeast of Crete, for example.
Hmm.
And it would be around 10 minutes, 9 to 10 minutes in time,
Hmm.
which is incredible.
Hmm.
The fastest publicly known missile defense systems have a speed of Mach 2.5.
Hmm.
Um, there's probably more. There's probably secret ones that, of course, a civilian like me isn't going to know about. But let's just play a game of probabilities. Like, okay, let's say they have some secret systems that go Mach 4, right? They're still toast, right? And even at that speed, there's something like even if you were to successfully hit a tactical ballistic missile at that speed, it wouldn't change course, right?
Right, right.
It's just a ball of like plasma at that
I think the most
stage.
concerning thing is that the hypersonic technology, especially out of China, is that it can do in-flight altering of trajectories. So basically, it can
Yeah, yeah,
avoid interdiction, which is also a
yeah.
problem too. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what's going to go on with that, but I do know. I think I kind of wanted to pick your brain about this, but again, I'll just fill this in for the audience. But Erdogan is basically the Islamist party or moderate right wing party, I mean, to them, in Turkey. And basically, he follows a neo Ottoman line, which is separate from the formation of the Republic of Turkey, which is under Ataturk. And Ataturk, of course, is like, I guess, the modern parody or representative of his faction is really kind of the Grey Wolves, but he's a neo-Ottoman, and it's very interesting to see how he changed his rhetoric to at first being against Hamas and now being vocally for it. I don't know if you were tracking on that, but what's your opinion on that, on Turkey's feel for the military situation there?
Yeah. Turkey is nothing to sneeze at militarily, and in the last week, I believe they expelled the Israeli diplomatic missions, and so that's basically their way of saying we're not going to negotiate with you anymore. We our ghost and its war. Turkey's military is substantial in the region, and but more the more relevant to is their unmanned vehicle industry is huge. Their drone industry is huge. It's on par with United States systems, and in some ways better because it's orders of magnitude cheaper, and that's probably like 100 orders of magnitude cheaper for them to manufacture all weapon systems that they can just launch infinitely to Israel and of course targets in the Mediterranean Sea. So it's the area of U.S. Military supremacy could be eclipsed in a conventional warfare situation. None of the policy leaders in America are willing to even acknowledge that threat exists, but could happen at
I
any point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I think that's the thing is that Turkey is like that wild card of NATO, and before it had been the case that NATO took in Turkey because they had a great positioning, geopolitical positioning on the USSR. But now it seems like Erdogan is like very deftly playing one side against the other, at once being a friend of NATO and then at the other time being a friend of Russia. But I think people really underestimate the robustness of the Turkish armed forces. So, for instance, we all know that they have a limited engagement in the Syrian civil war, but most people don't know is that they are very much involved in Libya and sustaining forces which are part of the, I think, the Grand National Assembly, which is against Haftar, General Haftar, who is the Russian proxy. But then, obviously, conversely, they kind of almost, nod, nod, wink, wink, coordinate with Russian assets in Syria. So, I mean, these guys are, it's not a joke. It's not like some Arab state like, the Iraqi forces in 2003 where it's just a walkover and they just get pummeled and we just walk over their, carcasses. I mean, Turkey is a very like robust country with a very sizable and potent land force with 1 million men under arms, and it has a significant air force that's very advanced, as well as, of course, as you just mentioned above, their UAS systems and basically their ability to manufacture a whole slew of drones with different capabilities that are actually proving to be the new introduction or mode of war, especially as we're seeing in Ukraine. And for whatever reason, it feels like the IDF hasn't learned from the lessons of Ukraine by proxy. And there's this famous saying, it's like, a dumb man keeps on making the same mistake. A smart man learns from his own mistake, and a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And it feels like the IDF didn't do any of those things at all. So I don't know what that makes them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what that
yeah,
happens. So
yeah.
so I think people really underestimate the situation, and I think people also are not like they don't understand the fact that Israel is a nuclear capable country. And it's something that we keep under wraps for very good reason because I think it would be very controversial. However, I think it's a concerning aspect because what is the case? I think the reason why the U.S. is so prone or provoked to defend Israel is less than any personal attachment. Of course, they're personally attached, but I think it's also a matter of stopping nuclear war. I don't know. What would you think about that?
Uh, that would be great to me. Let me ask you a question, Lance. You see on Twitter tomorrow video confirmation. The two U.S. Carriers in the Mediterranean were sunk with no survivors. What happens next?
Well, I think no matter who sunk those carriers, I think it's very well known that we would basically invade Iran. I think that's enough of a
Yeah,
provocation.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
We would that would be a 9/11 or even maybe better, a Pearl Harbor. That would be a Pearl Harbor kind of experience for us that has unpredictable consequences. And yeah, you could basically blame whoever you wanted at that point because American public doesn't seem to really care one about the truth one way or another. So yeah, but you could blame Russia. Russians did it, and that would be wildly popular with the media, and politicians would get elected on that. Like, yeah, why not declare war on Russia? And the what is it? The Overton window has shifted so radically this month that it's we're in unprecedentedly dangerous times. Like the I'm kind of reminded of like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like we are way beyond that. Like that is like looking in the rear view window, and and our train is not stopping. Right, we're going in a direction, and it's
I mean, it's a
it's gonna
conundrum.
hurt.
It's just like Lenin said. It's there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And I feel like that's exactly what happened in the last, what, 14 days specifically. And already we're seeing a number of lobbying institutions trying to rattle the war drum here, and I think it's really irresponsible because, I mean, if you think about it, if you game theory it through, let's say, okay, we're stupid enough to actually invade a capable country like Iran, and somehow, of course, we'll beat them. It's not a question of whether we'll beat them, it's a question of at what cost. Will we score
Yeah.
an outright victory or a Pyrrhic one? But more importantly, what is it? What does it mean? Follow on, as so their allies in the PRC, they'll obviously feel very much alarmed. Of course, on top of everything else, there would be a massive destabilizing effect, which we felt with Iraq. The oil supply from that region will be significantly interdicted, and I think that will affect the markets more than they're already being affected now. And so,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Did
so
you see the PRC has a fleet in south of Iran?
no,
PRC has a
I did not.
yeah. They have six frigates in the south of Iran right now, monitoring the situation. They have their both missile ships and electronic warfare ships there.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's something new. It's definitely something to add to calculus. I know that like Xi is very like he's very shrewd with his policy. I mean, that's the thing that you got to hand to the Chinese. I don't know if people are aware of this, but there's this book called Unrestricted Warfare, and since the 90s, the PRC has been revolutionizing their military. They've specifically been, rethinking what it means to wage war in a multi-domain kind of, I guess, atmosphere or environment. And basically, in the West, we have this weird Chevalier kind of code where it's like, okay, there's like a right and left lateral limit, and everything inside is okay, but there are rules and weird regulations, and it's like completely anathema to like anathema, excuse me, anathema to what war really is, which is a broad section front of marshaling all the capabilities of your military to, or of your country to political ends, and the military is simply a facet. And I think that's something America is only recently catching up onto. Of course, it used to be that Twitter was an arm of the Arab Spring and all this kind of stuff for the CIA, but I don't think they're as adept as the Russians or the PRC are with waging information warfare. I mean, we're seeing that now, like how crazy it is on the internet. Basically, you see both sides just going crazy, and you're just kind of taking a seat back, and you're like, wow, everyone's kind of saying crazy things. I'm just gonna shut up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Holding back from Fed posting is a good idea, and there are people out there that are going to try to get the masses wound up for their side, and what none of them want is for us to sit this one out. One of the interest. There's a lot of very interesting Chinese military theory and history. I could even touch on the recent events, and this story has actually been pretty suppressed, in my opinion. On the topic of information warfare that you just mentioned, the story is how just in the last couple days or last week, China has had hundreds of fighter jets patrolling around Taiwan. Ship movements are up, or military ship movements are up by hundreds of percent this month. And, the news or information about that is really not spread anywhere in social circles or military analyst circles. Like, basically nobody knows about that. And there's kind of a cultural trait that I identified in some technology industries I've been involved in, is that saying the word China or Chinese is kind of like admitting like you have no idea what you're talking about, because like no one actually really knows what is Xi's strategy, what is the goals of the CCP, like does anybody know? Like, not really. Actually, I could ask you, Lance. What's the official name of the government in Taiwan?
So it's the Republic of China, technically.
Yes.
And
How recently did you learn that?
well, I mean, I learned that because I'm a history spurg, so that's different. But I
Yeah.
know that the Kuomintang escaped over there after the successful, I guess, well, semi-successful, or but largely in part, communist revolution on the mainland. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, most people, as soon as they say Chinese, I mean, they're really revealing their ignorance because, first of all, China is not really China. It's the People's Republic, Communist Party China, and their feels for their I guess it is a continuation of Chinese history and political tradition. And I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative and the String of Pearls are something that are considered, but there's already, proxy conflicts happening in Africa, for instance, to secure rare earth minerals and obviously posts of trade. And also, more importantly or more alarmingly, they're setting up massive naval bases in Argentina. Are you aware of that too?
No, that's news to me.
So in Patagonia, the Argentinian government under the Communist Party, or well, they self-describe center left, but they're all commies. But basically, they leased this 100-hectare uh, property in Patagonia, where basically the Chinese are setting up a massive naval installation. And of course, if any Americans knows that basically the Monroe Doctrine reserves South America as their personal backyard, no matter where it is, even if it's the Cape, or whatever. It's basically very concerning because their power of encroachment and their ability to co-opt republics and so on and so forth starts like this. Basically, their pattern of subduing a nation starts with loans. So international governments, this is for the audience, by the way, but international governments approach smaller states that are in debt or have some problems or want some infrastructure built. And usually the United States does this. Basically, they say, okay, we'll build your highway and loan you money, but before we do that, you have to promise free elections, you have to do gay rights, you have to do X, Y, and Z, you have to blah blah blah, all this kind of crap, right? And the juice for the squeeze is not really good for these states. But the PRC comes in and they don't care what you do, dude. You could be doing genocide in your country, like in the Congo, or you could do whatever. But basically, they're like, okay, we'll give you this amount of money. They'll loan shark them, and if you can't pay in time, which they never do, in the case in point in Argentina, basically they're like, okay, in that case, we'll take payment of a lease, a 100-year lease on this specific piece of land. So, for instance, in Djibouti, that's exactly what happened. And the PRC is setting up a massive naval base, and of course, as the debt accrues, that base, the exclusive rights of the PRC to trade with that country encroaches. The political structure becomes uh, basically bought by the PRC and controlled, and that's basically their mode of existence. Is that they kind of come in, foot in the door, hook in the door with the economic aspect, and then they build out their military capabilities, and then they enforce that and bring to bear all their state capabilities to coercing and flipping that republic to their sphere. I mean, I don't know how aware of you are of that, but that's happening massively in Africa right now, where basically the Russians are helping coups d'états across in Chad and Gabon, and it's all flipping away from the United States, which is very concerning for us because a lot of, for instance, the stuff that comes in our smartphones comes straight from Congo, you know what I mean, for instance, or there's a uranium deposits in Chad, which is where the French get the majority of their uranium fuel. So for us, I mean, in the United States, we're a great power because we have a great space. We have obviously agricultural lands, a ton of arable land, we have a ton of like natural resources, we have oil, we have literally everything, and the reason why we go out into the world is to basically make sure that our enemies don't get it. That basically we're like a mafia boss, right? We don't want our enemies getting that. But it seems like China has been ascendant in that aspect. I mean, do you have anything to add to that point?
Um, well, yeah, I totally agree with you, and that's a really great description of how states, extend their military power over the world. You can even see the U.S. influence in that. Like, yeah, you can't pay back your loans. Okay, how about a military base? Oh, you can't pay the interest. Well, how about another military base? Oh, another one. And that goes on and on and on until it's like basically your country is taken
It's
over.
a
And
satrap.
yeah, yeah. There's got to be some good video game references to this,
I think the
to the
most
Age of Empires kind of
there you
thing.
go. There you go. I think the most refreshing thing is though is that it's not the end of history. As much as it is tragic and stuff, but the essence of being human is tragedy. It is, of course, life, love, passion, but also the converse of that. It's conflict, hatred, animosity, conflict, competition in general. And I think what's the Chinese proverb? It's may we live in interesting times, and certainly these are interesting times indeed. I think one of the most concerning things is that America doesn't know how to like recoil from overextending. So the Roman Empire lasted so long because they were shrewd geopoliticians, if that makes sense. They didn't do all this idealistic thing, and Henry Kissinger actually kind of writes this down in his book Diplomacy, and he talks about how America deals with the wider world from an idealistic standpoint, and it comes to the detriment of our safety. Basically, it comes to the detriment of our country and our economy. And because wherever we go, it has to be whatever crazy fad we're on at this point. So with Woodrow Wilson, it was basically enforcing the League of Nations and the democracy in Europe, which actually was a catalyst to what happened in the Second World War. Um, but that is the thing that the Chinese and the Russians and everyone else are kind of bringing back is just this realpolitik, this very transactional, mercenary relations between nations. You know what I mean? Basically, like I get X, you get Y. There's no strings attached as far as what you believe. I don't care as long as it benefits me. And I think that's very refreshing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it actually highlights one of the the main weaknesses of a republic that in a over a change of elections and administrations in power results to completely different priorities and even opposite priorities of the prior years, leading to a complete bewilderment and abandonment of uh, projects and relationships, investments that take like years or decades to mature.
Hmm.
And that's because we have no national strategy based on some underlying principles like we used to have in the past that has been replaced by fashions and our a lot of our recent policies can only make sense if you can imagine that there's a puppet master pulling the strings in the direction that they want the policy to go, regardless of the price of the cost, because it doesn't cost them anything, but it does cost us,
You
and
know,
that's why what we see with inflation.
you're absolutely right, and I think that's the most interesting parallel, a structural parallel that America is in right now, because obviously I hate using this because it's always the midwits and the middlebrow type people that are always, making allusions to the Roman Empire, but they have no idea what they're talking about. But basically, the late Roman Republic was a similar situation where, in the U.S. we're ostensibly a republic or a democracy or whatever crap, but really we're ruled by an international clique of oligarchs that are in charge of vast parts of our economy. And so they are the ones affecting political change and whoever else has interest lobbies. But of course, these lobbies are stronger than the state apparatus themselves, and they're kind of doing things on the basis of self-interest, their small self-interest, as well as politicians are doing or saying things based on election cycles, which is on a 2-year, constant turnover. And that's what Rome was going through, which is basically, you have people like Pompey Magnus and Julius Caesar, not Caligula, excuse me, Sulla, and the Gracchi brothers before. Is basically these private individuals were wielding so much power by themselves, but not complete power. And as members of the aristocracy, they were playing off each other in this kind of very race to the bottom, shorting of the political country, all to the detriment, and ultimately what culminated in what's called the Roman Revolution, which is the appointment of a Caesar, which for Julius Caesar, of course, he was dictator perpetual, but like it was Augustus who really kind of brought it to the fore. The only way I think America overcomes the issues that it's about to be shattered on is whether it can decide to have some kind of Caesar type figure who balances the interests of the elites with the people, who has their best interests at heart, or basically we fail to do that and we basically shatter and we disappear from the world stage, which is a very real possibility. And so, I mean, what's your kind of forecast on that?
Yeah, those are all great points, and yeah, I would. I'm in complete agreement. Might even tack on some more detail there, like the differences between the elites and the people are is very real in America today, and even in the ancient world, it was what they called the conflict between the orders, the plebeian working classes versus the patrician ruling classes, and the interests of the patricians were really, as an agricultural society and even a slave-based society, like their economic interests were tied to the land, they were tied to the people, as stable agricultural development required, decades and or years, decades, and centuries in order to reap all of the benefits from it. And that conflict that we still have today, say between the class conflict between white working class people and cosmopolitan multi-ethnic groups in coastal cities today, is characterized by the same kind of conflicts between values and economic gain. Like there are huge winners and losers in our society, just as there will always be throughout any societies. But I want people to question, like, who do they want to benefit? Like, what is the kind of country that we want to bequeath to our children and grandchildren? Or are we going to be a country that remains true to the heritage, traditions, and experience of what it means to be an American? Or are we going to throw all that away and become something else? Are we going to, quote unquote, decolonize ourselves? Are we going to ascend into a Star Trek technocratic utopia where we abandon our nationalist or tribal past, or do we maintain those traditions? And that's something that I think everyone should take very seriously.
I think
And
that's part. Just to interdict really quick, I think that's the main aspect that I try to bring and try to like tell people is just part of patriotism isn't this rah rah like going to war wherever you're sick at. It's caring for your neighbor. It's putting. It's not just about yourself. Basically, it's the antithesis of the boomer sentiment. It's not this individualist pull yourself up by your stupid bootstraps, which actually, by the way, they didn't. They had it handed to them. You know, their parents gave it to them. Actually, the boomers are probably going to go down as the worst generation, the entirety of human. Ah, okay, hey, Andreas. I think we got cut off there for a second there. The enemy is jamming our systems. So, you know, I think it's important to note that the Eisenhower, I don't know if you know this or not, but the task force that was in the Eastern Mediterranean just recently got transferred through the Suez out into the coast of Iran. That's a big happening, if that is any register to you. But aside from that, brother, I just really want to appreciate you coming on. I want to have you on a lot more in the future. And if before we go, if you could just tell me about your LatinaLinguaMachina.com project you got going on, that'd be kind of cool too.
yeah, sure. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of risks in the world today, and the situation of the naval forces built up in the Mediterranean and in the south of India reminds me a lot of the build up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. But yeah, for Latina Lingua Machina is a language learning website that enables people to learn classical Latin using artificial intelligence. And it exists with a chatbot that will teach you everything you need to know in order to start learning how to read and write in Latin or any other language that you're interested in. But the main emphasis is on Latin.
I see. Interesting. I think I'm definitely. I'm sure you know that I'm one of those guys that's trying to get into learning Latin, and then I'll work my way over to Greek at some point. But I'll make sure to put your URL down in the description box below, just for our legionaries out there trying to get erudite. You know what I mean? So, in any case, brother, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. I'll definitely have you around as the situation develops.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for having me, Lance.
Thank you so much. And this is General Lance and Sergeant Barnes and Andreas from Latina Lingua Machina signing off.